Hi, my name is Sridhar Rangayan. I'm the Festival Director of KASHISH Mumbai International Queer Film Festival, which is having its 12th edition right now. And we are in the middle of the festival, and you must have already been seeing hundreds of LGBTQ films. And we also have a lot of films from students from film schools. So today we're going to be in conversation with amazing people who actually are faculty members at different film schools and media schools in Mumbai and in India for the panel discussion, Teach Them Young, Qualitative Queer Narratives Emerging from Indian Film Schools. And how are the film schools creating an environment to nurture diversity and inclusivity on the campus, as well as the films that their students create? This panel discussion is supported by Whistling Woods International, who is also supporting the Best Student Short Award for the past several years. And the speakers are ANUPAM BARVE, who is a filmmaker and educator. He produced and directed a well-received web series in 8 parts based on stories around sexuality and self-efficacy titled Safe Journeys. He has also won the Best Director at Smita Patil Film Festival, Pune for his film, So What? Transitioning Positively. Over the last decade, he has taught at several art, film, and media schools like Westminster Film School, Lalit Kala Kendra, and Flame University. He is currently the Associate Professor of Film Direction at FTII. And then we have NIRMITA Gupta, who's the head of SCMSophia, the Social Communication Media Department at Sophia Polytechnic, and teaches advertising there. She moved from advertising to the education space in 2004 and has been at SCMSophia since then. In the fast-changing world of media, she looks forward to the challenge of keeping media education relevant for the students. And we have Rahul Puri, who is the managing director of India's leading entertainment company, Mukta Arts Limited, and head of academics of India's finest creative education institute, Whistling Woods International. A business graduate of King's College London, Rahul is now involved in all aspects of the company, including financing, distribution, production, exhibition, and marketing. He was keenly involved in the setting up Whistling Woods International, and now is setting up and building out a chain of cinemas under the brand name of Mukta A2 Cinemas. And we have Tangella Madhavi, who is an award-winning independent documentary filmmaker. She has made film for PSBT Films Division, Majlis, and NHK Japan. She has taught documentary filmmaking at Sophia Polytechnic and been a documentary mentor for iDocs. Tangella Madhavi is currently an associate professor non-fiction at Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, Kolkata. And last but not the least, we have VIVECK Vaswani, who is an actor, producer, teacher, writer, and the man who famously gave Shah Rukh his big break in Bollywood. He has acted in more than 100 films and numerous television shows. He has produced 13 films and 2 television shows. He teaches live action production and documentary and films at Pearl Academy, Mumbai campus. Additionally, he also serves on the advisory board of School of Media at Pearl Academy. And to moderate this wonderful panel discussion, we have none other than Bhagirathi Raman, who has been collaborating with people and organizations across disciplines, utilizing and developing her skills to bring together diverse ideas, people, cultures, and perspectives. She has been on the team of festivals like Tespo, Mami, the Kabir Festival, and of course, Kashish. Bhagi, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Really looking forward to this conversation. I would love to start off with, of course, hearing about each of your institutions in terms of what are the kind of structures that you all have as part of your academic program that helps people tell some of the fun stories that are coming out of there right now.
So I must admit that I'm an imposter in the middle of all the film school directors and deans. I don't belong to a film school. We are a media school, but we are a media school which has nurtured talent like Madhavi Tangella. So I'm pretty happy to be here. My credibility is not in question when we have filmmakers like her on the panel here with us. Of course, we teach cinema, and I think more than anything else, it's the love for filmmaking, and it's the understanding of how is it that you can communicate. That is the crux of SCM. More than that, there's a saying that says there's a promise of, every seed, there's a promise of 1,000 forests. And it's that which we do at SCM. It's the plant the seed of the content architects that we create. And it's that which makes the difference. Preparing the soil, laying down the foundations of empathy and inclusion. and understanding how do you see the world rather than just the skill sets of how do you make a film. What we do at SCM really is to do a siloless teaching, which means that what we learn from one subject would actually feed into the other subject. And it's the understanding of how do you construct a story, what is a narrative, and how do you do that across any medium that you want to. And I think that gives our students the cross-platform mobility to actually make films or write stories or create. So you'd have a Deepa Bhatia, who's an editor of commercial films, but she would also turn around and make Nero's Guests. Or you'd have a journalist who's also a great documentary film producer. So there are lots and lots of examples of where communication doesn't, at SCM, it doesn't get restricted to a medium. It's across the media, and it's also the kind of faculty that we attract, which actually helps the student understand. So it's the kind of projects that we do, the kind of work that the students are assigned to do. The very first week that they are at SCM is to take them to plant seeds. We actually take them to transplant rice. And it's just an eye-opening moment for the students when they get into the soil to make them understand what it means for a farmer to actually put that bowl of rice on your table. What does it take to do that? And then talk to them about inequality and waste. It becomes so much more easier for them to understand. It also encourages them to think out of the box, because none of them really have thought about it before and said, how did that come to us? So the second thing that they do is something what we call plot a pot, which is actually go out and put on map toilets, public toilets that are available in the city of Mumbai. And they find it really amazing that what we think of as public toilets are actually not. I mean, and the idea of understanding how limited it is, as a woman, how difficult it is for you to find access to these things. So these are the kind of assignments that we do are actually the kind that will lay the soil of understanding inequality, understanding how do you question social constructs, how do you question gender and patriarchy, thinking and nurturing that rather than imparting skills. Oh, of course, we do impart skills, but that's not the focus. And when you have Jerry Pinto and P. Sainath coming and talking, and Smriti Kopikar, and I can keep naming them, it's really, there's no choice but the students to think differently. They do have to understand what it means, to understand society from a lens which is more inclusive, which is more empathetic, rather than look at a society from your bubbles of privilege, which we never really seem to escape for most of them.
Thank you for that. That detail is quite something. We will now go to Hardcore Film School. Anupam, would you like to tell us more about FTII and the structures you enable for students?
What happens in film schools is, one ends up as an educator or as a teacher. What happens is, there's different areas of pedagogy all kind of coming into like a confluential, nucleus, as it were. And so you've got filmmaking, you've got film studies, a bit of that peeping in. You've got film appreciation, which students are started with in their first year. And there's also a bit of film history, because then you're reading up on different movements and so on. And each of these different streams within film education have completely different expected or desired outcomes in place. And yet what happens is, many a times you see, and not just with FTI, but I've taught at media schools or liberal arts schools or at places which specialize in film studies. And what one ends up finding out is, especially people or students coming from more academic backgrounds or more literary backgrounds, or more, what one would popularly say as a studious nature of courses, end up having more awareness, more alertness, and more know-how about the nuances of gender and gender identity and inclinations and so on. Whereas a lot of times what happens is, people end up at a film school wanting to only become craftspeople, only then to realize that what is expected of you is not to only know what an f-stop is or what aspect ratios are and so on and so forth, but to, like I said earlier, to have a confluence of all of these. So FTI has that kind of an input system in place where we have a compulsory film appreciation that all students of all streams have to kind of necessarily funnel through before they can go on into. We also have integrated courses in their first year of education where people do have to interact and so on. But I think what is also necessary, especially at a film school where it becomes precarious, no, because these are students who are going to go out and necessarily end up making films more often than, say, students of, say, media school would, or from film studies would. And so I think what is most important is the disambiguation about concepts, about notions, about understanding. So what ends up happening is a lot of, especially a lot of young impressionable minds these days with access to internet and access to different streaming services and different kinds of media, what ends up happening is people also pick up the wrong kind of terminology or the wrong kind of nomenclature. And anything, I mean, for instance, any film with women in it doesn't necessarily have to be or bear the burden of being a feminist film. You've got one element from the spectrum coming in, this is an LGBTQ film. So, you know, so on and so forth. So one has to also kind of take the students through the funnel of this kind of disambiguation about what comes under what and what gets classified as what. And then also try and get them to identify who they are and what they want to say. And so, you know, I think it's a bit of, from the educator's point of view, it's a bit of juggling between all these different streams and then kind of throwing them into a melting pot where, you know, students will still feel encouraged to, you know, indulge in all of these things and not get bored, keep their interests intact, keep also their enthusiasm intact, because what happens is you get them to sit in a classroom over a semester and then they itch to go out and want to make stuff. So it's also about calibration and finding that tuning between, you know, how much from these different streams to kind of pour onto them. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. No, we're definitely going to come back to the disambiguation part as well as and how it's unpacked, and boredom, enthusiasm, interest, because it's the age group we're also looking at. But before we get to that, Vivek, we'd love to hear from you as to how the school looks at, Pearl Academy looks at the structures to enable students to tell their stories.
Pearl Academy has traditionally been known as a fashion institute. They have a legacy of 28 years of fashion. So the then president, Nandita Ibrahim, came to me and said, Vivek, would you like to be our dean? So I took it on, and I really I've had the happiest 22 months of my life working with children, teaching them cinema. But I don't really teach cinema. Like, I didn't teach Shah Rukh how to act. It's not something I can teach. I did not teach Ashutosh Gawariker or Sanjay Gupta or Sanjay Gadvi or Anant Mahadevan or Rahul Bose or Mudassar Aziz how to direct. I did not teach Rasool Pukuti how to create sound. I taught them how to translate their skill and their talent and their imagination into sustainable careers. That's when you know you're making progress. And that's what I do at Pearl. So Pearl has 4 schools. There's a school of fashion, there's a school of design, there's a school of creative business, and there's a school of contemporary media. And I'm the dean of the School of Contemporary Media, where we have PG courses and UG courses. As a dean, I'm available to all the students. They talk to me, and you know, from Shah Rukh onwards, they come as my students, they leave as my friends. And yes, the most important thing is we don't discriminate. I don't care if they're Hindu or Muslim. I don't care whether they're Catholic or Jew. I don't care whether they're gay or straight. I don't care whether they're... I only care that they're human beings, and we talk to one another at Pearl as human beings.
So this is a really lovely way, because it's a very different approach at this point in time to what NIRMITA and ANUPAM had just said.
You cannot learn cinema from textbooks. You cannot... The only way you can learn cinema is by watching movies. When Shah Rukh lived in my house, I didn't care. If he wanted dinner, then from 6 to 9 and 9 to 12, we were sitting in the cinema.
And once you said that your basic like principles are sorted, like you don't discriminate and everything is good to go.
Every single film is a textbook, but more important, every single cinema is a college. We sat in Satyam Cinema and watched Saudagar. We got one response. We sat at the Metro Cinema and saw Saudagar. We got a completely separate response. We went to Dreamland and saw Biram Badshah. We went to Bahar to see Chandni. If he did not know his films, his cinemas, then there was no point in going and trying to sell those tickets.
Absolutely. So this diversity in which you're looking at audiences and likes and dislikes as well, it's quite a new approach. It's quite a different approach of looking at, especially when you say sustainable careers. But I'm going to take that off and move to Rahul and ask you about Whistling Woods.
Not being educated or qualified, I had to create a certain kind of formula for success.
Right.
Not having gone to film school and hating numbers when I was in school and being dyslexic, not understanding a thing, I had to do things for myself. And what worked for me, I just share with the students.
Rahul, we'd love to hear from you about Whistling Woods. I know there's many strands within Whistling Woods as well. And with the chat with Meghna, I think she also talked about structures that you've got in place, especially for the LGBTQI community. So we'd love to hear more.
What everybody has said, frankly. I mean, I think Whistling Woods is we try to amalgamate a lot of what has been said before in terms of giving the students the opportunity to study lots of different, I think, important parts of education. I think it's important to remember that when students come to college, they're 18 years old. I mean, they're still very young, and most of them, the majority of them, come from an Indian education system which is extremely rigid and perhaps doesn't allow them to explore in depth enough in certain areas. And I think as Nirmita said, I mean, experience is so important, right? I mean, you have to know culture, society, politics, because ultimately filmmaking it's an expression of that, right? I mean, you're communicating something. Even those commercial filmmakers that I say that they're not making a movie to send a message. I mean, ultimately they are sending a message, whether it's good versus evil or good triumphs over evil or whatever. I mean, whatever you want to say it. I mean, there's a message. There's something that we're saying at the end of it, and whether that's advertising or whether it's film or whether it's documentary. I mean, you are trying to say something. What we try to do is, create this sort of cross-pollinating platform where students from different specializations can come together and work together and collaborate, because as Vivek says, I mean, the most important thing about the film industry is that you have to work with people, right? I mean, you're not going to walk in somewhere and someone's going to say, wow, I've been waiting all my life for you. You are the person I've been looking for. No, you have to work with people. You have to learn to work with people. And those people are not going to come from the same backgrounds as you. They're not going to come from the same places as you. You're going to have a different level of experience. They're going to have a different level of experience. And somehow you have to come together to, spend 18 months looking at each other's faces, doing what is extremely hard work, which is making a film. When, the students come in, and we have a batch typically in filmmaking of about 120 students to 130 students that will come in. And what is fascinating about that first day is that you can see the diversity. Yeah, when they all start talking and they all start interacting and they all start telling us a little about themselves, you start to see the diversity, the sheer diversity in that group, right? Where they're from, what kind of backgrounds they're from, religion, sexuality, all of those kinds of things. And it's so important, I think, to get those things sorted right from the start. For us, our first project that the students do, I mean, Nirmita was talking about hers, the first project that we do is we give the students a camera and we say, well, you think you know how to make a film, now go and make a film. And so literally what we're going to do is... Which is
a really interesting way of doing it, because it's almost the opposite.
Well, it came from Subhaji, who basically said what we need to get them to do is unlearn what they think they know, so that now they're in a position to say, okay, I don't know anything. Now please teach me. We do a wonderful sensitization workshop with Ladli Dr. Sharda comes in, and there's a lot of gender sensitization that we do. Obviously, we're associated with Kashish, and we have been for a while. And I think that what we try to always do, and we started our own sort of LGBTQ support group on campus, which was started by the students. And I think what I enjoy most about the fact is that we never tell the students what movies to make. We never tell them what they should make. They reach in to themselves, sometimes very personal stories.
Absolutely. And I can see Madhavi really like nod her head very vigorously at quite a few things that you've said, including of course, that sometimes you just need to unload and unlearn, because everyone comes in saying, I'm a filmmaker, I just need to get a degree sometimes. And the other is the sensitization part, and telling your one story and telling it continually, but telling it better. That's where the craft and the skill comes in. So Madhavi, we'd love to hear about how your institute provides these structures.
I'm very happy to have this conversation, because I think this is the first time that the top media schools or film schools are actually talking along these lines as what do we do in terms of discourse, in terms of film discourse. I think, I teach at Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, Kolkata, and I think the campus itself is so beautiful that, the unlearning begins with spending a lot of time with non-humans. And coming to the point of pedagogy, I think, as Rahul was saying, we strongly encourage being facilitators, trying to shape students' film form, like the way they want to tell stories. So I think this creates a very big responsibility on the faculties themselves out here, and also the students who go through this intense demystification of what a film is, how do you go about making films. So as Anupam was saying, that it is a melting pot of identities, of cultures, etc. So there is no one way to pinpoint what happens in a film school like Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, but one thing is for sure, that we have been able to facilitate films in languages where films have not been made in India, and also things are changing on the film school campus, wherein students are now part of the decision making. We have worked towards a certain kind of decentralization, wherein students are part of the committees, the gender committees, the cultural committees, the sports committees, and everything. And I think they finally shape up what the institute means at the end of the day. And we are, and as Rahul put it, we are looking at an intensely creative, laborious process of putting together a film. And yeah, a little bit of everything of what we just exchanged in terms of what we greedily want to facilitate for the students.
Yeah, if I may interject at this moment, just for a minute, I think this word inclusivity was used a few times till now, and I think that is a very key pivotal word that needs to float around more in all kind of discourse and debates and conversations and arguments and everything. Because what happens is, when we're speaking about the spectrum and when they're speaking about normativity, and then the spectrum or people within the spectrum are considered to be somebody, some people who are maybe drifting away from what is normative or what is normal or what is a very straightforward binary that maybe people from previous generations kind of grew up and lived with and so on. But because the discourse is changing, I think this goalpost of normativity and also this complete unapologetic, unabashed, non-negotiable idea of inclusivity needs to be kind of, I think, harped upon more and more in discussions around film education.
And opened up as well. Absolutely. In fact, this brings me quite to our next part, which is we've heard from all of you as to how your schools function from an overarching point of view, right? In terms of how you're looking at either making it a sustainable career, whether you're looking at unpacking certain notions, whether you're looking at getting your hands down and dirty, something not related to craftsmanship and direct skill at all. Now, to take all of that and to put in a lens of the LGBTQI community, because this is specifically for this discussion is specifically for Kashish as well. How do each of your institutes manage that aspect? So let's take inclusivity, let's take LGBTQI and the queer community, and the mandates or the underlying principles of each of your schools, and how have you seen that grow or change? Or how do you feed this in students to get the kind of stories that you do?
One of the first things that I would think for us at SCM is really not to differentiate. I mean, I don't look at LGBTQ, it's a spectrum or it's their choices, which don't really affect them as students as far as I'm concerned. The stories they tell, the experiences they bring are certainly different and certainly something that we would love to experience. But as students, that's not something that should concern me. It's something that is very private, and it's something that all of us just need to accept for what they are, and acceptance without making it obviously accepting. It's just, that's the routine, that's the philosophy of the department, that whoever comes in is welcome. And you are looking at a perspective which is going to be very unique to each student. No two students, in spite of the fact that they might have actually done the same kind of schooling, they might have done the same kind of, they've gone to the same institutions, will still have a very different perspective. So to welcome all of them and to harness each one and to get them to their potential is what will make a difference. And I feel that that is what we do at SCM, is to actually give them that safe place to say their stories the way they want to. Because like Rahul said, that all of them have a story they want to tell. And that's one of the things that is most important in a communication school, is how do you tell your story without, which will ring a chord. So to again come back to what Vivek says, is to sell the tickets at the end of it. When I say sell the tickets, I mean, it's today now what the number of views or how viral it has gone. So it's the idea of spreading your story and your message that you want to encourage the students to do, but you give them a perspective to do it right. That if they're not understanding what is inequality, if they're not understanding what is the gender discrimination that you're talking about, you don't want to make a film on a community and make it into a mockery. You want to be sensitive about the communication that you're talking about. I wish that it was compulsory for a person who got into a media school to do sociology, psychology, and literature, because I think that's absolutely imperative. Otherwise, you're actually spending time getting them to unlearn some of the concepts that do. It's not to say that engineers and doctors don't make good filmmakers. I think the passion and the need to learn that would certainly make that make up for that. But you do need to work hard at it. So if you're not a consumer of the media, you can't become a content architect for that medium. How do you do that? So it's
so to ask you that
to...
question from an
Yes.
SCM point of view, with the LGBTQI in perspective, how do you do that? Or because you've got these young kids coming in who have an understanding of life. We know, of course, that there's so much more that goes into it. How do you then unpack or create something whereby they can unpack these notions?
I wish we could
Big
do it a
question.
little more than what we do actually. I mean, we do
Something's better than
expose,
nothing.
no,
Yeah.
in the sense that we are such a short course. So we are only 10 months of a program that does a wide spectrum of media. And so I really don't think that I spend enough time. But, they wanted to do a ad campaign and they were talking about breaking the closet and the whole, so we work in teams. So the campaign, the first thing that we would encourage the students to do is to actually go out and do research and find out what is it that your consumers think about this campaign. So when they went out, they realized, so they spoke to their, target audience, and every one of them said that they would not discriminate against a person from the community, but they all felt that people were homophobic and that people who belong to that spectrum were discriminated against. But you don't discriminate. So 98% said they would never discriminate. But 98% also felt that people from that community were discriminated against. So who does the discrimination?
Correct.
So the
That's a big
students
question.
yeah, no, so it was just a hypocritical saying that, yes, I will not discriminate. So the students to understand that. So these are the kind of things that you do. You, of course, expose them to, cinema that is a little more sensitive. You also expose them to people who come and talk about it. You have, so we always have guest speakers who would be, sort of making them more sensitive to that. It's a question of learning that, yes, there is an inequality. What inequality is there will itself pan out. And the idea is really to sensitize. So, sort of telling women, do you want, equal rights? It's like preaching to the choir. I mean, which woman is not going to want that? It's telling the guys. So it's not about raising a feminist daughter so much as raising a feminist son, right? To have him acknowledge that women have equal rights, then you've done a great job. So it's the same thing with SCM, that you're not actually telling them about specific inequalities so much as able to recognize that you don't be unequal in your dealings, that there has to be an inclusive, and it is all inclusive. So it's not about your gender spectrum, it's about respecting. So we've had students who come and tell us that, this has happened for the last 3-4 years, where they're actually sort of the first time coming out and talking about being recognized for the gender that they want to be, or specify the gender non-binary. So they want to call themselves they, and we respect that. There are things there are social constructs that need to be broken, that need to be challenged, that need to, sort of the new voices need to be heard. And if we can give them the courage to speak up, I think that's a very important space that we are providing them. I mean, that's what an education institute should be able to do.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is right, because I don't think anyone on this screen is going to go like, I don't really like you for who you are, because there is that work. There is, and the institutes themselves, as even Vivek mentioned, the fundamental principles are in place.
Sure.
But everything else needs to be unpacked, which now brings me to Anupam, because you'd mentioned disambiguation and taking concepts and actually being able to unwrap those. Plus, what you brought up was actually talking about the internet and its influence. So with that in mind, can you talk about how this works with the LGBTQI space and your institute?
In terms of the internet, the internet's a tricky space. You never know what, because I mean, one of the first websites that I was kind of introduced to when I kind of became like an internet junkie was Stumble Upon. And and that's pretty much, it sums it up. You stumble upon things. It's not informed, planned, educated reading. It's not, I used to go to the British Council Library here in Pune with the hope of wanting to find something by one of my favorite writers, then pull the book out, then sit there on that common reading room and read for a few hours. I don't do that now. What ends up happening is, like I said earlier, why the disambiguation is required here is because people tend to pick up things and latch on to them without clearly understanding the full connotation, or without fully understanding the scope of what a word would entail or mean. Because I mean, the first thing that educators, I think, have to begin with is try and completely dissolve any kind of us and them, be it between straight people and homosexuals, be it between homosexuals and asexuals, be it between anybody who's anything. But there's generally, it starts with an us and them, and especially in a place like the FTI, or I also teach. I used to teach a course at the university, and we used to have at the Performing Arts School, we used to have people from such diverse backgrounds. And I mean, the discrimination starts from people who can speak well in English or fluently in English, and people who can't, and then people who can't speak English properly feeling inferior to the people who can. So whilst also educating people about individuality, which also then becomes a very tricky thing, because you are, especially in a film school, you're working in a space that is so collaborative. And then where do you kind of build your boundaries about how much the people who are working with you on a particular project, do you necessarily have them conform with what you want to say? I mean, you could have a complete homophobe jackass on a set who's kind of holding the boom pole, or like holding the poly reflector board. How much do you go in that negotiation about what the kind of scene you're filming as a storyteller? And as filmmakers, one's kind of taking those diplomatic or political thoughts every day in and out while in practice. Because how much, I mean, there are filmmakers who think that every last person on their film sets needs to be in the exact same page with what they want to say. And there's some who say, I don't care. I mean, the guy's here to record sound. This guy's here to kind of do our catering. I don't care if he's, understanding things about the spectrum, as long as the chola doesn't have too much oil in it and we are happy with his lunch, I mean, so there's people looking at it differently. But what we try and do in film schools, or in media schools, or in performing arts places, is build safe spaces where we tell them it's okay to come out and talk, it's okay to express. Because one has to understand that people also come from, like I said, a variety of backgrounds, of a total diversity within, the kind of where they come from culturally, geographically, financially, so on and so forth. So a very few people till they come to this level, and FTI is postgraduate, but before they've come here, they've hardly been given a forum or a safe space where they could actually express. So the first job, I think, is to just kind of instill a confidence in them to think, okay, yes, safe hai. Nothing's going to be used against me. I'm not going to be lampooned for who I am, what I am going to say. We don't necessarily only need to learn about craft here, but we can go on this. I mean, it's a pilgrimage of sort, isn't it? In a way, I mean, film education or art education is a pilgrimage which starts and doesn't end. I mean, you get a certificate and you go out and you still keep on learning. And sixth project, you're looking back at your second project and thinking, hey, I could have done this differently.
Yeah.
So
that is that journey.
Yeah, it's basically flattening out the dichotomies, and any kind of discriminative us and theming about anything. And it could be about the spectrum, it could be about financial backgrounds, it could be about language of expression, it could be, but just building safe spaces to encourage people to speak. I think what ends up happening is sometimes, especially in arts education, teachers also end up becoming unqualified therapists of sorts. Because so many students, especially coming into higher education, then like to confide in their favorite teacher or a teacher that they're comfortable with. And in a way, you become a confidant. There's also this responsibility of then non-disclosure. There's also responsibility of trust. Because, they're coming up with gripes about or things from home, their relationships, their obstacles or hurdles that they're kind of wanting to or having to cross this particular year and so on. And it's firstly by saying it's okay, it's fine. We'll find. There's this teacher that used to constantly tell us when I was doing film education, when I was doing my master's, and he used to constantly say, creative people find solutions. So regardless of where your hurdle lies or what you want to jump over, we'll find a solution.
I'm going to actually take this up. This is a lovely line to actually take this and move to Vivek, who talks about sustainable careers. So I'm going to bring the creative people will find solutions along with how one can make a sustainable career, what would go into it. How would Pearl Academy, how would you look at how this can be enabled?
I actually started in theatre, and that was even before I went to the 11th standard. Everyone was gay, everyone was straight, and it didn't make a difference to anyone. I worked with people like Pearl Ramsey, who was Jewish, Ronnie Screwvala, who was Parsi, Fareed Kareem, who was Muslim, and I was Sindhi, and our caste, our creed, our sexuality made no difference to no one. What did make a difference was how good you were on that stage. That was critical. And then when I started doing film, I realized one very important difference is that whereas caste and creed didn't make a difference, your sexuality possibly may make a difference, especially if you're an actor and you're in front of the public. So a lot of people were in the closet. But over 20 years, that has also stopped. And now that I'm in college, we have a very powerful message that we are equal and we support people who are gay as much as we support people who are straight. There's actually no discrimination at Pearl. And I think this comes because when you're teaching things like fashion and design and media, you are going to have a very vast body of different kinds of people.
And how do you translate that in an academic, from an academic point of view?
I don't know. I mean, the last time we had short films and essays, some of them were straight, some of them were gay, some of them were transgender stories. For us, it's the same thing. The quality of your work will matter far more than, oh, see, I made a film about gay people, how brave I am. You're not. It's a terrible film. Make a great film. So really, at Pearl, we've transcended thinking that there are certain things that we have to look at or be more sensitive or not. The sensitivity issue in my head, especially in India now, is about morals, decency, dignity, ethics, etc. You're straight, that's terrific. You're gay, that's terrific. You're asexual, that's terrific. You're transgender, that's terrific. We supported the Engendered Film Festival last year. My students were there. Deepa Mehta's film Funny Boy was the opening film. We were with Faraz Ansari, whose Sheer Khorma was played for school, and they applauded it. We had dinner with them. Maina Mukherjee was there. Jitin Hingorani was there. All of them were there. Jitin has requested my students to come to Dallas and be part of the Dallas Film Festival, which is pretty cool. A couple of people whom I respect tremendously since I've grown up with them. Parmesh Shahani from Godrej. He's left Godrej. He is now part of my advisory board, as is Jitin, as is Jamal Sheikh, who's the editor of the Hindustan Times Brunch. And I have found that being inclusive means not thinking about it too much. It's taken for granted. It's not something we have to look at every day of our lives. So that's the way we work, and I'm pretty cool with it.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to then take this to Rahul because there's actually a group, an LGBTQI group that the students started themselves. Did they have a need for it, and that's how it came about, or did it come from the institute? And how does it work?
No, it didn't come from the institute. I think it came from the students themselves. That was something that they wanted to create. They wanted to basically reach out to newer students that were coming in and show to them that there's a group of students that maybe like-minded students that they can come out to or talk to if they have any issues or discuss. And I think what everybody said is pretty much a lot of what we do. I think Anupam was absolutely right in saying that this basically starts with trying to remove the boundaries between faculty and students so that students feel comfortable expressing themselves, talking about the things that they want to talk about in class, outside of class. We do a lot of mentorship on the projects that students are making. And yeah, Vivek is absolutely right. There is a lot of this where students arrive at film school and then they believe that there's a certain film school kind of film that they have to make, and they pick topics that perhaps they don't have any idea about, or they don't have a great sense about, but they think that, oh, now I'm in film school, I should make this kind of film. And you have to talk to them and tell them that, listen, you don't have to do this. If you are going to do something like that, then at least understand what you're talking about, understand the community that you're talking about. And if you don't understand it, no problem, go off and make something else. I mean, you don't have to feel pressured into something like that. I mean, we do a lot of courses. We do a full gender course. We do a full culture course that students have to take. And sometimes, kids who come from places with very different lenses, or have been taught to look at the world in a very different way, they do struggle with those things. I mean, and I think that it is important to identify those kids as well. It's not just important to identify students who have a very broad field of view and are very inclusive and understand, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also important to understand those kids who are going to struggle with things like that, because sometimes in a very liberal school, they are the ones that feel left out. They are the ones that feel in a minority, and it's important to understand what their issues are, and work around them. Because I mean, ultimately, if we're talking about inclusion, then we're talking about all kinds of inclusion.
Absolutely.
Here, right? I think the important part is that this comes from our faculty. Our faculty gives students that feeling that nothing is off the table. If the story is good enough, and that's the key. If the story is good enough, nothing is off the table. You can talk about anything and everything that you want to talk about. And we create that sort of safe haven that students feel comfortable expressing themselves to their fullest. Yes, faculty is there to mentor them and advise them sometimes on issues of sensitivity. And so as long as the student understands that those are the challenges that are ahead of them. But if they still want to take up those challenges, sure, knock yourself out. I mean, that's their call. It's their film. It's their story, and they need to own that in terms of what they're saying and what are the potential consequences of that.
No, thank you for that. And this actually brings me straight up to Madhavi, because you mentioned a lot of your students come from medical and engineering backgrounds. So this is not a liberal arts educated, familiar with these concepts, have spent any amount of time, and here's a bit of a blanket assumption I'm unpacking these, right? And they're now there in the field of creating work that influences everyone's perception of society. It's a big responsibility, because, and NIRMITA, I'll agree here with advertising, every little bit tells you something, it conveys it. How do you deal with this mix of a particular background coming in to do a very different sort of end result medium, like working with another medium that's accessible to the public in such a way?
Wow, I'm still anxious about the previous question that you had posed the panelists about how is the response of the institution per se to LGBT issue.
Particularly, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Having been trained at SCM, NIRMITA, that cannot be taken away from who am I as a person. I think there is a problem. There is a problem to begin with, wherein film schools, there are more boy students, than women. The community, when I say the kind of thing that we at SRFTI are working on is that I think 3 years ago, we went through an intensively introspective mode, wherein we felt that, the response, a certain sensitivity or response has to also be built within the system. So we came up with a gender committee consisting of the students, certain faculties, and people from the administration, because, it is just not enough to facilitate students to make the films that they want to, because I think as a film school, there has never been a kind of a censorship as to what kind of films you can do, what kind of films you cannot do. But I think when it comes to LGBT sensitivities per se, it has to be built within the system of how issue is responded to, what's the first response, how are the peer group responding to a certain issue there, and how are the faculties talking about. Like, we had very few women faculties. Now the number of women faculties are more, which kind of indirectly makes it easier for students to talk if there is an issue. And I must say that in a film school like ours, especially on students' WhatsApp groups and the kind of jokes, there is an active participation of students to call out each other. Hey, that's not fine. Hey, this has to be the response. Like, hey, so I think we are not there yet. We are not there yet as systems being put in place, and wherein students are made to debate on these issues. They're made to read, they're made to write together, etc. But certainly there has, like, if a student wants to talk about a few personal stories, always, we don't have, except ensuring that film is made and made very peacefully. We don't interfere, but I am very, very restless about forums and workshops, dialogue forums being put as part of the curriculum, which is not sufficient yet. I will not run away from the fact that there are a few students in the film schools who would like to talk. To create an atmosphere of inclusiveness is just not an emotional response. It has to be a systemic response. It has to be inculcated in the way the syllabus is envisioned, like in the way, small things are done, not as events, but processes along the year, all around the year, wherein, these conversations can continue. So, yeah, and I think it has just started in SRFTI, and we are in the process. So I think when I talk to Sridhar or Obro, it is also very encouraging that yes, this needs to be taken along the way.
Essentially, each of you are saying very similar things from very different locations, because yes, absolutely. How can we talk about inclusion without putting together some sort of structure or having some sort of system in place where it can be unpacked? And we did speak about how it needs to be unpacked from the baggage that one comes into a space with, and then being able to look at it. And NIRMITA, of course, brought about the acceptance without conditions, where you need your liberal arts education along with skills developing, because that gives you the tools by which you can take ideas and sort of unpack them in your language, in English, of course. Linguistically, that's a whole other 5 panel discussions. Vivek did mention, I think at the core, it's your ethics matter. The decency with which you work towards each other matters. Anupam mentioned that it starts from the faculty member as well. Like, you can't talk about systemic change, you can't talk about structure if that person in the room themselves is not has not done the work or sat and questioned these aspects. And Rahul spoke about how sometimes the students just come up with solutions to problems that they are facing. It's about enabling that space and then finding out ways by which your the institute and the student body can come together. And Madhvi, that's why I think now you mentioned that they are part of decision making, right? They're part of and it's so much responsibility.
Yes. In this, there are arguments, there are discussions, there are temporary disagreements in friendships, and then they all come together, so it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think this is part of who we are at the end of the day. And I just hope that that how do I conclude something overwhelming like this? I just hope that, I can rope in more of Kashish into SRFTI.
Yeah, this can't be a conclusion. It has to be ellipses, because that's where we're at right now. It's always a work in progress till we find best practice.
Thank you so much, each one of you, for contributing with your expertise and experience and bringing in together so many different aspects, what your institutes is doing to enable inclusivity and diversity. This particular panel discussion is supported by Whistling-Wood International. Really appreciate Vivek, NIRMITA, Madhavi, and Rahul, and Anupam, of course, for this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Bhagi, for this wonderful hosting. Really appreciate this totally. Any of you have any questions to any of the people here, please put it in the comment box and I'll make sure they see that and respond to it for sure. Thanks a lot for joining in.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, for giving us the opportunity to talk. Thank you, Bhagi.
Thank you.